Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I kind of feel a little bit like a fraud, in a sense, the interloper, the lesser light, after Petrov and for Peter and with Paul. My interest is really in Taiwan and China. That's where my experience has been. I was in Taiwan with the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan and working there, and my PhD thesis was on translation into Chinese of the Bible and the issues that go along with translation. The interest in Korea, as I was reflecting on this, it actually began long before I knew very much about Korea at all. It began really when I was just left university. I went to Germany. I was in Hamburg as a guest teacher. And the students there, it was just before the wall had come down. And when the students talked about their relatives in the East Germany, they would always say they're drüben. And drüben means over there. It means over there, drüben. And I thought, over where? You know, because it just didn't sort of make too much sense. But they couldn't bring themselves to say the German Democratic Republic. They had the emotional power behind the separation at that time was really powerful. And that was a preparation, really, I think, for seeing something of the feeling that goes into the separation of families in North and South Korea. So that was the first kind of feeling, without actually even mentioning North Korea, of the issues that arise. And of course, the German situation is resolved itself. The German solution has been, so-called, has been one of the proposed ways forward, but I'm not, won't be talking about that today. The next basic main fundamental or important contacts I began to have with Korean people were through the church. And that really began in the late 1990s or late 1980s into the 1990s when many Korean people came to New Zealand. And at the time, we were forming the Asian Ministries Committee and the Asian Council, and I found myself really getting involved very much, not just with Taiwanese people coming and Chinese people coming, Indonesians, we have all of those groups, but the biggest single group are Korean, and they arrived in large numbers. And Korean now is the second major language, or second spoken language on the North Shore of Auckland. And at Rangitoto College, it is one of the key languages that you have to know, for teachers have to deal with Korean young people. And so Koreans, as we all know, are an important part not only of society but of the church. And so as the convener of the Asian Council, I became very involved with setting up Korean churches and Korean communities. And Anaseo, Kamsahamnida, Moksa are all words that I began to learn in Hanim because you are involved, or I was involved with Korean folk and still very much am. So that was one of the, and then I got the opportunity to go through to Pyongyang through Don Bori, who Paul was mentioning in the mid-2000s, and that sparked even further interest. The latest and perhaps most interesting experience was, and Paul gave photos there, was I had the chance, because of those earlier connections with the church, of leading or conducting the North Korean women's soccer team around Auckland for a week. So I was in the unusual position of me and 19 teenage girls going around Auckland. And my job was to make sure they got from place to place. And the thing I just want to say about that was when we got to the airport and they came out, they got on the bus, and it was 45 minutes from the airport to Ridges Hotel, and I was sitting in the front seat, and all the girls were behind. Now for 45 minutes, there wasn't a sound, and you wouldn't know that there were teenage girls and young women behind you. And that just seemed so incredibly unnatural. You know, whenever you're going to have teenage girls sitting behind you and you don't know they're there. And that was for 45 minutes. And that was something of the initial atmosphere of that tour. And one of the things I do remember about that is, just for light relief really, in our erudite and discussion, one of the things I remember about that was the girls were waiting outside Ridges Hotel and for their bus, and this very well-dressed Kiwi woman came out, very nicely attired. And there were sort of 19 pairs of eyes, sort of looked at her hairstyle, went down over her clothes, down to a bag, her necklace and all the rest of it, and then back up again. And you could see these girls just looking at the fashion and going back up. There was no expression. It was just this real New Zealand fashion that I'd seen for the first time, and they were really intrigued by this well-dressed Kiwi lady and looking at her bag, and all 19 eyes were going up and back up, down and back up again. And so it was very, they were normal young women, is what struck me at that point. I've just got some photos of the tour, and just to give you, can we start the pictures now? And we'll just work through these. That was looking up at the Sky Tower. Now, one of the things there, that's their uniform. And perhaps you can turn the lights off, if that's all right. Is that okay? Just so we can see the pictures clearly. This was at the, they were looking up at the top of the Sky Tower. Very nice young ladies, really. You'll notice as we go through, the uniform's all the same, that's typical, but the haircuts all completely is the same. The uniform haircut. That's next one. Oh, I'm doing that, am I? Yeah, and we went up the Sky Tower, and there was this young Kiwi kid coming out, and this was one of the first times I saw them smile. And I asked the mum, would it be all right if the team just had a little cuddle, right? And so here he is, this little fellow, and two of the team members enjoying having a cuddle on top of the Sky Tower. Oh, going back again. Am I going the wrong way? Let's try this. Oh. Yep, there they are again. And that's the first time one of the first times I saw them smiling. And when they're holding the little fellow. And one more. Now this was another time when they actually proved to be totally human. They were looking out, and this is where the basic lesson here is North Korean people are just like you and I. Right? We're talking about people here, flesh and blood and faces. And they were looking out over Auckland, as you can see. And they were just standing there looking, and suddenly a bungee jumper went flying past. And this captures the moment when they weren't expecting this bungee jumper. And there was this huge squeal of yell, and they all raced to the thing to see what happened, to see him squashed on the bottom. And so they all trooped up in nice file, but there were times when the humanity of the situation came through. And this is one where they're all just sitting, looking there, down at the bottom. This is the team, and that's the Australian team in Auckland getting ready for the game. And that's the New Zealand team, and our girls here on the right. Yeah, the flag to the soccer representatives, New Zealand holding the flag, and up there, I'm not sure how many times you see the North Korean or DPRK flag in Auckland, but that was there then. Now this was one other time I really had the opportunity to get to know the girls a bit better, was to teach them rugby. Their hotel was a little round from Victoria Park, and so we went down just walked down and came down to Victoria Park, and there was a touch rugby team. Pacific Island folk were playing touch rugby, and then so I gave them the opportunity. I asked, could we have a ball? And so we then taught them how to pass the ball. First lesson, you don't need two people to pass a rugby ball. But that was, so they're learning to pass, and they were having a great deal of fun there. And that was just some basic exercises that we came up with. And there they are, and they're actually starting to have a lot of fun. And it was really good. Here they're at practice, and it was really hard practice. They were really, the coaches were giving them a pretty thorough workout. And that would be it. Now, I'll give that back. We had a technical malfunction with some notes, but if you want my notes, I'll just give them to you straight afterwards. So, we've called this North Korea at the Crossroads, conflict between church and state. And what I really want to talk about really is to start with, what is the church's position on this church and state relationship? And this year is the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. And that's when, in 1517, Martin Luther put his 95 Theses on the wall, on the door of his church. Now, he prefaced that with these words: "Out of love for the truth and from desire to elucidate it, the Reverend Father Martin Luther, Master of Arts and Sacred Theology, an ordinary lecturer therein at Wittenberg, intends to defend the following statements and to dispute them on them in that place. Therefore he asks that those who cannot be present and dispute with him orally shall do so in their absence by letter. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen." And what Luther was really saying is he is absolutely convinced that his understanding of faith in Jesus Christ is right. Here I stand, I can do no other. But he is really saying also, I could be wrong. There is truth. I am out of love for truth. The truth. What is truth? And what is truth? Not out of love for the gospel, but out of love for truth. And I could be wrong. There's something more to learn. And so he is really saying he wants to debate that. He wants to talk about that. And so he is convinced he's right, but he's prepared to talk about and learn about what is truth and what is true. And I think I'm looking forward to what Peter has to say, because truth and any peace settlement would be based on truth. And one of the things we've been talking about in the car coming and up to down to Hamilton is who started the 1950 war. Did the South invade the North, as you might hear in the North, or did the North invade the South? And so what is truth? What actually happened, and what are the facts? And that Martin Luther really is reminding us that it is really important to know what is truth and what is the actual facts. And out of the facts, you become or can establish a peace treaty and reconciliation. And it was interesting in the report in the paper this morning about the seismic earthquake that the professor of geology at Auckland University said, yes, it did happen. It wasn't an earthquake. It was caused by the atomic nuclear explosion, and this is not fake news. This is not fake news. That is what he's saying. This is true. This is what happened. It is actually caused by a nuclear blast. And so truth is really important. The second thing I just wanted to say is out of the Reformation was from 1620 on the Mayflower. And so this is really a message for a certain Mr. Trump, that on the Mayflower, the chaplain there said, I am verily persuaded that the Lord hath yet more truth to break forth from his holy word. In other words, we've always got more to learn from Scripture. We may think we understand it and understand it completely, but in fact we don't. Because there's always more truth. There's always more we can learn, and we need to be open to changing and developing and growing our ideas. And so that becomes part of the church's approach to church-state relationships and every other relationship. And finally, on this thing, Martin Luther also said, if I knew the world was going to fall to pieces tomorrow, I would still plant my apple tree today. If I knew the world was going to fall to pieces tomorrow, I would still plant my apple tree today. And what he meant was, in faith, from a church's point of view, no matter how chaotic the world seems, no matter how hopeless things appear, there is always hope. And from a church's point of view, what the church brings into church-state relationships is hope. Truth, the willingness to learn, and hope. Those are key things in any discussion about peace and reconciliation. The second thing I just wanted to mention, in the biblical and Western traditions, there is always something greater than the state. And so there will always be a conflict between church and state. Or there is always someone greater than the state from a Christian point of view. And when you look back in history, you see some of the iconic, or the one that we all think of is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who in 1933 on state radio in Germany was asked the question, unprepared, he wasn't told he was going to be asked the question, but would you follow the Führer or God if you had to? And he immediately said, I would follow Jesus Christ. And what he's saying there is that Jesus Christ, his commands are higher than Hitler. And of course, from that point on, Hitler made the decision that he would make sure that Bonhoeffer was assassinated. De las Casas was a Dominican who began the whole process of human rights in South America, and he opposed the Spanish conquistadors. And that's where human rights comes from, out of conflict between church and state. So now to move just very quickly to a history of the church in Korea, and why this is an important topic, the church-state relationship in Korea. The church-state, well, the Christian faith really first appears in any important form in 1603 when Matteo Ricci's influence, not him personally, but he was a Jesuit who went to China. And some of the Jesuits made trips to Korea. And their philosophy was, or their idea was, to convert the emperor in China and go down towards the public, the general population. And so they were there trying to convert the emperor in China and to convert the leaders of Korea. And one of my favorite stories about Ricci is he gave a clock to the emperor in China because he wanted to see the emperor. He wanted to have contact with the emperor so he could share the gospel with him and bring him and make China Christian. That was the vision. However, he didn't give the emperor the key to the clock. So of course the clock wound down, and so he would have to come back and wind it up. And so that was the theory, was he would have constant contact with the emperor by having to wind up the clock. However, what the emperor did was simply push the clock on a tray out into the hall. Ricci would come along with the key, wind it up, and go away again. And so he never met the emperor. So that story illustrates what their strategy was to convert the elite and work down to the population, to general population. For that reason, and the Koreans and the Chinese saw what the strategy was, and from 1758 to 1866, Christianity was outlawed and persecuted in Korea. In 1884, the first Protestant missionary arrived, Horace Allen, and the Protestant missionaries were basically effective from 1884 to 1910, a very short period in any other, when you compare it to other countries. But in that time, they were very effective, and Pyongyang became the Jerusalem of the East, what was known as Jerusalem of the East. And that's because 2/3 of the Christian population in Korea at the time were actually in the north and centered around the Pyongyang area. And there was a number of reasons. I'll just try to explain quickly why the church grew so fast. But the church was very strong in what is now the Pyongyang and the surrounding area. And one of the stories that comes through a lot is that of R.J. Thomas, who was a Welsh missionary who refused to leave Pyongyang, and his head was chopped off by a Korean rebel. But the rebel actually then became a Christian and a well-known pastor in Pyongyang. And that story, for many peoples, gave flesh and blood, if you like, to people becoming Koreans actually accepting the Christian faith. The reasons why the Christian faith grew very quickly after 1910 was firstly because the occupying power was not a European power, it was the Japanese. And the Christianity stood beside the Korean people against the Japanese invaders and occupiers. And so Christianity was seen not as an imposing Western power, but as a faith that stood beside the Korean people under quite a stressful time. And it's interesting to compare the Japanese influence in Taiwan, which was much more positive. Taiwanese people think much more positively about that period than the Koreans do about the 1910-1940 period, 45 period. A second reason was that the Christian church brought some of the best hospitals, the best universities into Korea. And Korea University, Yonsei University, were originally founded by missionaries. And so they brought medicine and education into Korea. And that was seen as a very positive contribution. And the link between Christianity and the education and medicine was seen as quite close. And so there was an ability for people who benefit from education to actually start to consider the Christian faith as well. The US was seen as a very positive model at the time of development, and the United States was seen as a Christian country. And the other interesting thing was the missionaries didn't stay too long. They were kind of only had between 1884 and 1910. And in that period, they trained some elders and made a basic Christian community. And after that, that Christian community had to stand on its own feet. And that meant was that those early Christian Korean ministers and elders were very strong and capable because they had to be. They had to stand on their own feet. And that contrasts with somewhere like India, where you could argue that the Christian missionaries stayed far too long and controlled institutions and the churches far too long. So the early missionaries, the early Christian ministers and elders and deacons and community had to stand on its own feet very quickly, but that bred a maturity and a depth of leadership quality that was, stood it in good stead, and the church grew. So in brief, those are some of the reasons why it grew. In the post-war period, you have, of course, the emergence of Kim Il-sung, and Dr. Petrov has given us the history of that. Just to say that Kim Il-sung's mother was a very active Christian and very committed to the church. And there's kind of a paradox here that I just want to point to just for a couple of moments of the Christian role is paradoxically positive, and yet in some ways in North Korea it is the most repressed church in the world when you consider the history in China and the Soviet Union. And there are a number of reasons for that. But as I say, it should be, one would have thought, very positive because Kim Il-sung's mother was a Christian, his grandfather was a pastor, and the influence should have been quite important and on him. And you would think maybe he would have accepted a more sympathetic approach. However, when you look at North Korean sources and writings about religion, you find, in fact, that there is very little said, and maybe this is the influence, that Kim Il-sung said very little about religion and very little attack on religion in his actual official writings. And that contrasts with the Soviet Union and with China. And one of the things he did say was, religion is a kind of superstition. Whether one believes in Jesus or in Buddhism, in essence one is believing in a superstition. Historically, religion fell into the clutches of the ruling class and was used as a tool to deceive the people in order to exploit and oppress them. While in recent times it's been used by the imperialists as an ideological tool to invade the peoples of underdeveloped states. And so in some ways what he's saying is that maybe not the faith as such, it is the use of religion. And so personal faith and use of religion and the way religion has been abused and used and abused by powers, colonial powers, those are two different things. In 1974, the Article 68, Chapter 5, 68 says, citizens have the freedom of religious beliefs. This right is granted by approving the construction of religious buildings and the holding of religious ceremonies. No one may use religion as a pretext for drawing in foreign forces or for harming the state and social order. And so what again, the state is very much confining the church and its institutions into a very, very structured, very limited role. And one of the ways that comes about is that there is no youth work in the church. No one under 18 may attend a worship service. You attend the Communist Pioneer Youth League, but there's no youth work, no Sunday schools. And there is no work outside the church, apart from one bakery in Pyongyang. There is a theological college now allowed, but that's kind of very difficult to find out about the nature of that theological college. Participation in international forums. International forums has been far more limited than it has for, say, China or the Russian churches. And most interestingly, perhaps from the point of view of translation, the Bible is not printed in North Korea. It is printed in China now. There was a period, of course, during the Cultural Revolution where it wasn't, but at the moment the Bible is not printed or publicly available for personal use in North Korea. And so, but what you do get is the desire, with the two open churches that there are in North Korea, the question of how visible should the church be. And in China and the Soviet Union, there were the underground churches, we've heard of those, and there were also the open churches. The open churches were often accused of just sort of being stooges, but on the other hand, what you see now from China and Russia was the desire to have an open, visible witness continuing in society. And so there's a difficult choice to be made, and it's not for us, I don't think, to decide whether people who are in the open church, the public church, the Bongsu church, the Chigul church, are really Christians or not. There's a lot of discussion about that. I don't think we should go there. It's too difficult a question because it's their choice to decide whether the church should have a public and open witness or whether it is more important just to witness in private and secret. So there was a kind of paradox going on here, but when you go back to 1950, you see that Kim Il-sung had disestablished Christianity, and churches in Pyongyang, the buildings were appropriated as enemy territory, and church buildings were used as offices by the North Korean government on the assumption that the Christian nation of the United States would not bomb churches. Well, the US Air Force then promptly bombed churches, and Pyongyang was devastated in the 1950-53 war, and really in the same way that Dresden and other famous, well-known cities were destroyed. It's often forgotten that Pyongyang was completely leveled. And what that then did was ironically help to destroy any public form of Christianity in the north. The bombing actually destroyed the churches, and it also destroyed the government offices in the churches, which created a force, a movement, an understanding that Christianity was an alien, a pro-US form of religion. However, with much irony, much of the North Korean language about Kim Il-sung actually appropriates Christian language and Christian ideas. And words like the eternal Son, he is the eternal Son, that's very reminiscent of Christianity. His birthday now falls at Easter, right? And the 10 principles of life that he espoused parallel to the 10 commandments. And so you get this kind of very strong appropriation of Christian language to the into Kim Il-sung and his Juche philosophy or understanding of how the state works and the philosophy behind political life. Professor Ken Wells concludes in a statement on all of this. In conclusion, the language and symbols and methods of propagation of the North Korean official ideology suggest a silent policy of systematic displacement of religion, both by substitution of ideological terms and symbols for former religious ones, and by direct appropriation of religious forms themselves. And what he's talking about there is the deification of Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un is through these language like Eternal Son and 10 Principles of Life. Right, just for the last little section of this, and I hope there's some questions later at some point that we can look on. I want to just look at what the World Council of Churches, the Ecumenical Forum on Asia, which is an ecumenical and international body, the Christian Conference of Asia, what they say about the worldwide church, because the church and state conflict includes the international church as well as the church in Korea itself. I should say, after the Second World War and after the Korean War, many of the churches in Pyongyang, Christians, I should say, came south. And what you now find in Seoul are churches like the Yongnak Church, which were founded by Koreans who'd come south. And that church now has still a very strong ministry mission towards reunification and the care of defectors from North Korea. And so you have a whole church whose founding members were North Korean, now in Seoul City in the south, who are dedicated to the reconciliation and reunification of Korea. However, what that means, of course, is that they are very strongly anti that particular church, anti-North Korean, the North Korean government. And it's interesting, they've got every province in the north. When the opportunity comes, they have already designated people to go to each province and to establish churches again. And so what you've got is, in the south, a number of churches made up of people from the north. And so many of the Christians in the north came south, and so depleting the north of Christians, fleeing from perceived dangers of the northern regime. So what are the 5 or 6 key points that the World Council of Churches is making? And this is important because the President-elect Moon Jae-in, he invited the Pope and the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches, Olaf Fixer-Tveit, to come and talk. And he received them in the Blue House in Seoul. And in talking to them, he asked them to help mediate and provide contacts with the North. And so he was looking to the church, President Moon, looking to the church to help create the environment in which there could be discussions with Kim Jong-un. And so that was in May, and he received the Pope, and then later the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches. Nothing has come of it, as far as as I've heard, in terms of actual events. But it is interesting that the World Church has seemed to have a very important role. So, what is the World Church saying? Well, the first thing that both the Vatican and the World Council will say is that there is a moral duty to work for peace, and that war is incompatible with the teachings and example of Christ, and the Church insists that the first moral duty of all nations is to work together to resolve by peaceful means every dispute that arises between them. North Korea and South Korea have a duty to work for peace, both of them, and that is ironclad and cannot be negotiated as such, not that point and that principle. The second thing that they want to suggest is to back off the rhetoric. And in their statements, they say, recent comments by the leaders of the United States and North Korea threatening hostilities are beyond alarming. Such threats of fire and fury, the likes of which the world has never seen, by President Donald J. Trump, and all-out war wiping out all the strongholds of enemies, including the US mainland, by spokespeople of the Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un, only serve to bring our countries and the world to the brink of war. We therefore urgently call on both leaders to tone down their similar and mutually inflammatory rhetoric. That's by the National Council of Churches in Korea. Thirdly, both sides need to back off military action. Both sides need to back off military actions. The lives of the people in South Korea should not be threatened by the provocative acts of the US, the United States, and North Korea. The road to peace is a difficult one, but the harder it gets, the more important it is that we keep to the principle. We cannot start a sincere dialogue when we place blame for the opponent's extreme reactions, when we insist on various preconditions for dialogue. In other words, what they're saying there is the United States should stop its joint exercises with the South Koreans, and the North Koreans should stop the missile exercises, missile tests, and they should create the environment for peaceful dialogue. The next one is a lack of a credible peace process. A peace process has to be worked out, not just the desire for peace, but a process by which peace can come about. And included in that is the peace treaty and the nuclear test ban. 122 countries have signed the nuclear test ban, and they urge all our governments to sign and ratify the treaty and then see that it is implemented. Lift sanctions and re-begin humanitarian programs. We could, the sanctions, are not working, and Fixer Tate said, "It is not at all clear how the new sanctions can be expected to make any more positive contribution to this extremely delicate and dangerous situation." He called for a sea change in the international community's approach to North Korea in favour of dialogue and engagement rather than military and political confrontation. So, just to conclude there, at the World Council of Churches meeting, Hee Sung-jung, hope I said that right, who's a bishop of the United Methodist Church in the United States, at Leipzig in the meeting, concluded, "Love's invitation is to turn a person's life into a treasure hunt to find all that is lovable in that person's life. It's a search to discover what lies beyond, and beneath the unlovely details." And so what he's suggesting is, it's time, really, we saw each other as human, just like the pictures of the girls in the team. We are human, we belong together. We have only got one world, and in that world we must all live and live together. So, I think I should conclude there. Thank you.